Well, something else that happened in the House of Commons last night was a question. Well, not last night, yesterday afternoon even, a question raised by Michael Fabricant to the Prime Minister. He spoke approvingly of the Prime Minister's plan to set up an office of the Prime Minister, a new structure within Downing Street to prevent issues like Partygate happening again. Here's what he had to say.
Michael Fabricant.
President Truman had on his desk, "The buck stops here." So the Prime Minister was right to apologise for the events that happened in number 10 Downing Street. 2 weeks ago, I reminded Tom Harwood that Tony Blair suggested that there should be an Office of Prime Minister so that it could be governed not from 70 Whitehall, but from the building itself. Could the Prime Minister tell me how he envisions the office will work? Will the Permanent Secretary be based in number 10, controlling what civil servants do in number 10?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, very grateful. I think the House does understand, even if many people outside don't, that number 10 actually hosts about more than 400 officials on a busy day. They have a huge amount to do, and we need to make sure, no, Mr. Speaker, they're working very hard. That's what they're doing.
When you come from there, you can't always see.
The Prime Minister there speaking to Michael Fabricant yesterday in the House of Commons. Now, I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised to hear my name enter Hansard there in the Commons. It was a strange moment as I was sitting up in the press gallery. But let's remind ourselves of that conversation that I had with Michael Fabricant about 2 weeks ago on this programme, where Michael Fabricant suggested the creation of this office of the Prime Minister that now the Prime Minister has said he'll establish. Welcome to the programme. Now, a lot of people won't understand exactly the structure of how Downing Street operates at the moment. Could you run through what the problem is with this whole Cabinet Office situation and why a separate office of the Prime Minister might be better?
Yes, I mean, a lot of these news stories coming out about drinking parties are actually nothing to do with the political team or Prime Minister. It now turns out that it was civil servants drinking, and we know that, for example, on the eve of Prince Philip's funeral, one of them was a going-away party, and, you know, at the time, Boris was 40 miles away in Chequers, and the Prime Minister wouldn't have known about it because it was at a sort of junior level within the civil service. Now, the problem is this. For years and years and years, the people who work in Downing Street, the civil servants, are part of the Cabinet Office. And the Cabinet Office is some way away in Whitehall. And all the senior management are in Whitehall, which is a separate building. And I can tell you that if you have a pass to go to the Cabinet Office, it doesn't get you into Downing Street, let alone into the building. So what I'm arguing for is an idea that actually Tony Blair came up with and failed. And what Tony Blair's idea was that there should be an Office of Prime Minister, as you said. And why would that make a difference? It would mean that the senior civil servant management team would actually be based in Downing Street. Because Downing Street, in a way, operates almost as a separate fiefdom, independent of the Cabinet Office, even though all the civil servants, and I think the special advisors too, are all paid for and report to rules for the Cabinet Office in a separate building. So it needs tighter controls, because it's quite clear that both in Downing Street and maybe in the civil service as a whole, and frankly, listening to what you were saying earlier on, I suspect businesses too, you know, had their own interpretation of what the rules should be.
So it's your argument here that the Prime Minister doesn't have enough control over the operation of the civil service, particularly when it comes to doing Downing Street business?
I would go further and say that the civil service itself doesn't have enough control over what goes on in Downing Street, because it is a separate building, because there isn't easy connections between the Cabinet Office. There is actually a secret tunnel, which I've been through, but you pass an armed guard and you have to have a very special pass to do it. But for all intents and purposes, it's a completely separate building. And the whole thing is becoming conflated now with what Boris Johnson attended that garden party, which we all so famously know about, and other parties that were going on, which the opposition quite naturally are dancing up and down with glee about, suggesting that these all were attended by Boris Johnson, when in fact it's quite clear that, as I say, junior civil servant events, why would he know?
Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Michael Fabricant, someone who seems to be rather influential over this Operation Downing Street because, of course, his idea of this new Office of Prime Minister has now been committed to by the Prime Minister. Welcome to the programme, Michael. Did you have any discussions with the Prime Minister about this over the last couple of weeks?
No, I haven't. And in fact, I think it's something that was being discussed anyway. But at least we can say that GB News got the story first, 2 weeks ahead of all other broadcasters. So well done on that.
And you mentioned that Tony Blair had pursued this idea as well, trying to unify the structure of management within the building, or should I say buildings behind me. I think it's probably a good idea to show the audience just what Downing Street looks like. Of course, the gates have sealed off this street from the public since the late 1980s. But if we start over in the far end of the street with number 12, that red brick building, that of course connects through to number 11, above which the Prime Minister's flat is. We go right across to number 10, that famous shining black door, but then also all the way round number 9 Downing Street is the building in the far end where the press briefings are. It's got a bit of a white front and it connects to the rest of Whitehall as well. And of course, between number 10 and number 9, there's this sprawling complex that all connects to one another as well in various different ways. About 400 people working across the street. Behind me, a very big set of offices, not quite the small house that you can sometimes imagine when just seeing that one front door. Actually, as I stand out there, we're just seeing some people walk out of that front door. There's been a cabinet meeting this morning, particularly with regards to the situation in Ukraine. Well, let's get back to Michael Fabricant now. How would this Office of the Prime Minister, in your eyes, work?
Well, as I said to you 2 weeks ago, really, the idea is it's a medium-sized department anyway, having, 400 people working there. So it's pretty strange, actually, that we haven't had this before. The idea would be that you would have the senior management of the department being based at number 10. And as you quite rightly point out, it is a massive complex. And what you couldn't show in your picture just now was how far deep it goes. Because, in fact, there are a whole series of buildings before you get to the infamous garden. So they would be based there. But it's interesting, you mentioned, as I'd mentioned, that it was Tony Blair's original idea. He had 2 ideas, I recall, both of which he didn't manage to actually produce. One was the Office of Prime Minister, which our Prime Minister, Boris, is now going to implement. The second thing was he wanted a prime ministerial jet, and I remember at the time it was being nicknamed Blair Force One. He didn't get that, but Boris already has got that, so he's delivering.
It's interesting when we're talking about an Office of the Prime Minister, a prime ministerial jet. These all sound rather American. And is there a valid criticism here that we're moving away from cabinet government, establishing the Prime Minister's office as the primary form of government? Does that detract too much from the sort of collective responsibility and cabinet government that this country was founded on? Of course, a cabinet meeting taking place as we speak. Shouldn't that be the body that makes the decisions rather than the Prime Minister in and of himself?
Well, I think in practice what happens is that a number of decisions are made in sub-cabinet committees, of which there are as many members, including the Prime Minister, and then it's brought before Cabinet as a whole. Look, this is something that has evolved over time. John Whittingdale was saying last night at a meeting I attended, I can't say what, otherwise I'd be giving the game away, that when he worked for Margaret Thatcher, it was a very, very small team indeed. And then Tony Blair produced a much, much larger organisation. But, I think it's needed. but it can go wrong. Where you don't get control from the top of the civil servants, an ethos develops, and we've heard about these suitcases of wine being brought in. Why they don't just have a bar at number 10, I don't know. But anyway, we've heard the story about people going to the local co-op or the local Tesco and getting the wine. But this isn't anything new. I mean, this happened under Theresa May, this happened under David Cameron, and I'm reliably informed it happened under Gordon Brown as well. Now, that's not to say that, you know, there were the great drunken orgies, as the press like to make out. It's people having a very quiet drink after a hard week on a Friday evening when the boss is away, because most of the time, of course, the boss, whoever that boss happens to be, is in Chequers or in the constituency. So it's pushing it a bit to accuse Boris of being aware of everything that went on.
Well, Michael, thank you for your time this morning. Really interesting discussion there, and I'm really glad that we got to show some of the bits that you don't normally see about Downing Street as well.